When anyone complains about unfair competition, consumers beware. That is really a cry for special privilege, always at the expense of the consumer. What we need in this country is free competition. As consumers buying in an international market, the more unfair the competition, the better. That means lower prices and better quality for us. If foreign governments want to use their taxpayers' money to sell people in the United States goods below cost, why should we complain? Their own taxpayers will complain soon enough, and it will not last for very long. History provides lots of evidence on what happens when government-protected industries compete with industries who have to operate in an open and free market. It's almost always the government-protected industries that come out second best. Nothing would promote the long-run health of the steel industry, make it into a more efficient, profitable, and productive industry than for the U.S. government to keep its hands off, neither providing special privileges nor imposing special restraints. And what's true for the steel industry is true for every other industry in the country. These women work in an industry that so far hasn't asked for special protection, the silicon chip industry. Every one of these small squares on this disk is a highly complicated, integrated micro circuit. An American technician examines them for defects. It's highly skilled work, and she's had a lot of training. When she's done her job, the rejects will be separated from the rest, and the good circuits will be packed up and sent halfway round the world to Malaysia. The product of American technological skills returns looking like this. Each microcircuit has been enclosed in ceramic by a Malaysian worker who is highly productive at this sort of work, but the Malaysians are not able to test their products. So back they come here to America to be fed into these machines. American engineers are good at producing sophisticated machines. In an operation that lasts a fraction of a second, these machines can test every circuit, can grade it for quality, and then can sort it into one of 6 different categories of reliability. And that's not the end yet, because American silicon chips are exported to many countries where foreign workers assemble them. The final product is then returned to our stores, so that you and I, the consumers, can benefit from $10 calculators, as well as from a lot of other electronic devices that not long ago simply did not exist. But even when the international market in labor is seen to work to everyone's advantage, people still put up arguments against it. The usual argument against complete free trade is that cheap labor from abroad will take jobs away from workers at home. Well, what is cheap? Japanese workers paid in yen, and American workers paid in dollars. How do we compare the yen with the dollars? We need some way of transforming the one into the other. That is where the exchange rate enters in, the price of yen in terms of the dollar. Suppose at some exchange rate, Japanese goods are in general cheaper than American goods. Then we will be buying much from Japan and selling little to them. But what will the Japanese do with the extra dollars they earn? They don't want to buy American goods. By assumption, those are all dear. They want to buy Japanese goods, but to buy Japanese goods, they need yen. Calls will come in from all over the world to places like this, offering to buy yen for dollars. But there will be more offers to buy yen than to sell yen. In order to get customers, those offering to buy will have to raise the price. The price of yen in terms of dollars will go up. As you remember, that is what happened in 1977 and 1978. By late 1978, it took 50% more dollars to buy a given amount of yen than it had taken a year earlier. But what happens when the price of the yen in terms of dollars goes up? Japanese labor is no longer so cheap. Japanese goods are no longer so attractive to American consumers. On the other hand, American labor is no longer so dear to Japanese. American goods are more attractive to the Japanese. We will export more to them. We will import less from them. New jobs will be created in export industries to replace any jobs that might have been lost in industries competing with imports. That is how a free market and foreign exchange balances trade around the world when it is permitted to operate. As you contemplate this, you may come to agree with me that what we need are constitutional restraints on the power of government to interfere with free markets in foreign exchange, in foreign trade, in many other aspects of our lives.
I'm Linda Chavez. Welcome to Free to Choose. Joining Dr. Friedman tonight for discussion of free trade are Michael Walker of the Fraser Institute in Vancouver, British Columbia, and Stephen Cohen of the University of California at Berkeley. Dr. Cohen, is Dr. Friedman right? Should we keep government totally out of it and allow Adam Smith's invisible hand to operate?
It's not even a question of right. It's a question of impossible. We've been trying to keep government out of our economy now for several hundred years.
Have we?
Oh, I think we definitely have. The last 10 years have witnessed the greatest crusade to pull government out of the economy in this country in many, many years. The net result is we have much more of it. This is a way of
Alexander Hamilton, in his report on manufacturing,
said, get it in.
Came out in favor of government involvement.
And since then...
And tariffs on steel were introduced early in the 19th century because steel was said to be an infant industry.
And it was.
It was, and it still is.
Are you saying that there's more government control because we've been trying to get it out?
No, of course not. What I'm trying to say is we're fighting against the unreal. We're dealing at the level of ideology right now, that government should go away and stay out of the economy. And we're talking as though in the United States we can determine our own future. For instance, if you take Japan, which has been the most successful competitor to the United States. They came from, frankly, nowhere a couple of generations ago to now have wages that are higher than ours. They produce superior products, and they've done this with very active government involvement. Maybe they were wrong to do that. Maybe they were right. Maybe, as Professor Friedman said, had the government butted out, they would have done yet better. The fact remains, if we say take the government out, it's like saying let's play football with sneakers and T-shirts and touch, which is a game I like. And the other guys are still using hard-shell helmets. You can't do it
Stephen,
yourself.
that's the fundamental problem with your analogy is that the competition that we have in trade is not a competition in which somebody loses and somebody wins. It's a competition in which everybody wins. And this idea that the Japanese, that as a competitor to the Americans, that the Japanese in some sense won, is nonsense. Look at all the Japanese automobiles on American roads. Everybody who drives a Japanese automobile or uses a Japanese product is a winner as a result of this competition that there has been between the Japanese and the Americans for the sympathies of the American consumer. So it's quite wrong to take this sort of military or combative notion.
That might be right if the whole world did that sort of thing, and that Japanese consumers would have had the choice during the 60s and 70s to drive Fords or Volkswagens.
That's a fallacy.
They didn't.
A fallacy.
It's a fact.
Any individual country by itself, on the average, tends to benefit from free trade, regardless of what the other countries do.
What you seem to be saying when in your argument against free trade is that the customer is always right unless they pick an imported item.
No.
And if they pick an imported item, then they require the help of the government to assist them, to tell them, look, you've made an unwise choice here, and therefore we're going to put a tariff or a quota on to prevent you from selecting the imported article, whether it's a Japanese automobile or a Korean television set or whatever, because you don't have the ability to make this kind of choice yourself.
That is not what I'm saying.
Well, what are you saying, Dr. Cohen?
Now, I'm saying there's a problem here. We gain in the very short run. If we assume that this whole place is going to have an earthquake and we're going to be out of business in a year and a half, this is a brilliant idea.
We gain in the long run.
We send them paper, they send us cars. Let me finish. If, however, we go in the long run, the first round is Japanese semiconductors come in. Terrific. Let's even assume the Japanese are dumping them. They're subsidizing, they're pushing them in your market.
Absolutely.
The first thing, we get a lot of cheap semiconductors. Terrific. This wonderful fictional person called the consumer has a gain. However, the same person happens to be a producer. That's how he gets his income to become a consumer. He's suddenly put out of business. two things occur. Turns out you can't suddenly go back in the semiconductor business. That is, we've been put out, but we're going to rally and go back in. It takes a long time to develop the skills, the know-how, the scale. So you're pushed out of that business.
But Stephen, neither one of us knows what the future will hold. We don't know whether it's wise for us to accept these free or almost free semiconductors and use them and to develop our industries and so on.
We do.
But we can stand back and ask, what is going on? What are these Japanese who you apparently think know the future and are taking a competitive position that says, well, we're going to invest in subsidizing these things and shipping them to the United States to destroy their industry? Where are they investing? Where are they who take such a long-term view? They're investing in the United States.
No.
And they're investing in the United States because they realize that, for example, in the industry that you selected, the consumer electronics industry, they realize that anybody can make a VCR. But it takes a good, well-developed service industry, for example, to develop the software that's played on a VCR.
That's
and that's
not
why they're
true.
buying, excuse me, that's
Nobody
why
can make
they're
a
buying,
VCR
that's why
except the
Sony,
Japanese.
I
There
know.
are no American
But who cares?
VCRs.
But who cares? Sony.
No, I'm
It's
just
just
talking about-
Sony is just buying MGM.
Yes.
Sony is buying MGM because they realize that the product that's produced by a VCR is not the machine. That's a $200 item. There's a $1,000 item that's made up of the software, namely the films that are going to be played on that VCR, and they're investing in America because America produces the software.
Let me
And I
interject
think
here
it's
for a second because I want to ask Dr. Friedman a question. Dr. Friedman, maybe VCRs aren't that important, but what about the defense industry? Should we really keep hands off there, or should we step in and protect?
Even Adam Smith made national defense an exception. But I think that while in principle it's an exception, in practice it's an excuse. I think one of the greatest statements I've heard about this whole problem was by Colin Clark, a famous economist, who said, you know, that people say that the trouble with that free trade is fine in theory, that's what Mr. Cohn is saying, but it doesn't work in practice. He says they're absolutely just wrong. It's just the opposite. Any half-baked graduate student can give you a half a dozen special cases for tariffs, infant industry arguments, the problem of getting back in, the kind of thing you've mentioned, and so on. The trouble is that those arguments don't work in practice. In practice, we put on the wrong tariffs in the wrong places in the wrong way. The same thing is true of Japan. You're talking about Japan's great success. But let me ask you, does the average Japanese citizen, you say his wages are higher than they are in the United States. That's only because of an artificial exchange rate.
Quite.
There is no Japanese who will tell you that the standard of living in Japan is higher than the standard of living in the United States. It is not. And
Quite.
why not?
Of course, because
why not? Because of the Japanese protectionist policies with respect to rice and with respect to land. The average Japanese pays something like 6 to 7 times the world price for rice. We do the same thing in the United States. The average American citizen pays 2 to 3 times the world price for sugar. How does the United States benefit from that? We put on once we adopt your policy, we move in a direction whose only outcome is a waste of national resources through centralized direction of our activities.